Hi everyone, welcome back to A Little More Inspired. My name is Blanca. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button so that you never miss any of my new episodes. And if you haven't checked out my website, alittle.moreinspired.com, go explore all of my content. I am very excited to be recording my talents episode for the book, The Three Ordinary Voices of God by Matthew Kelly. I have been breaking down this book and the three ordinary voices for you and also learning myself. Again, this is all coming from a place of learning and reflection as well. I've already broken down the voice of needs. Today, I'm excited to dive into the talents because this topic is something that I myself am currently en route. I really like the way that Matthew Kelly breaks down the voice of talents because I think that it's a journey that we all have to go in to discover what makes us feel joy and what makes us feel alive, and then also what God wants for our life. So, Matthew Kelly begins this chapter by describing how every human being is endowed with unique and specific set of gifts, talents, and abilities. These are divinely bestowed and intimately connected to each person's life and mission. So I think a lot of us are conditioned to believe that we might not have any talents because we're not a big star or because we think of people who are talented as these extraordinary beings. And so when we don't view our life as extraordinary, we might mistakenly think, I must not have any talent or I'm not here for a purpose. But Matthew Kelly describes how we all have a purpose, they all matter, and they're all equally important. So he begins this chapter by breaking down what some of the reasons why we're conditioned to believe that we don't have any talents and how the world begins to shape our way of thinking and how deeply focused on just our wants are. And as a spiritual person, if you're a Christian, you are here to live a spiritual life. And so some of the questions that you may have been asked that may have derailed you are often well-meaning because they train us to think about life incorrectly. So when we're children, we're constantly asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And as you get older, as you get into your teens and you're in high school, you start to get asked, what do you want to study in college? And then, you get into college and you studied what you wanted. And then they ask, and after graduation, what do you want to do next? If you look closely at every one of these questions, each one of them contains the word want. They condition us to live by our wants, but no one has ever found true fulfillment simply by doing exactly what they want. Each of these questions excludes the possibility of vocation, calling, or mission. It is in those things that we find deep fulfillment every heart yearns for, but so few ever experience. Growing up, I think as a teenager, I never really thought of myself as having a vocation or a calling or a mission. I think a lot of us are also in survival mode too, and we just want to, do the right thing. And sometimes we just haven't been taught to be introspective with our life. And I wish now that I could go back and maybe do things a little differently, especially as I was going into college. So here are some better ways to reframe these questions that we tend to ask younger people is, what do you think God is calling you to be when you grow up? What do you think God wants you to study in college? What might God be inviting you to dedicate your life to after graduation? I wanted to give some alternative questions for anybody who feels like those aren't questions I can ask. It feels too personal. Maybe you're just having a conversation with a friend and maybe they're not spiritual, but you want to ask questions that are thoughtful and introspective. Who do you feel called to become when you grow up? What field of study feels aligned with your gifts and purpose? And what do you feel invited to dedicate your life to after graduation? Yeah, so these are just some questions that I thought would be helpful for anyone that doesn't want to say, what do you think, God? Or I know that having conversations about God is very personal, and I was just sharing the original questions that Matthew Kelly asked, but I also wanted to share just different reframes that you could just ask everyday people, even if they're not spiritual. Questions, even though they're slightly different, they bring it back to the person to go more inward. And I think sometimes we're just so focused on outward in that we forget that life should be inward out. When I was in college, I was a fifth year senior, and I kind of wish that I would have had better mentorship because I was the first one in my family to go to college. And it just reminds me now that like, I wish somebody would have told me back then, take your time, there's no rush to declare a major, and you have to find what you're talented in. I think that maybe sometimes people go into certain majors or whatever because their parents did this or that, but then they end up finding out that they're not really good at that or it's not something that comes easy to them. So the difference between these two sets of questions is simple but profound. The first set focuses on the self. The second focuses on God and on the belief that He created us for a specific purpose and equipped us with the talents and abilities we need to fulfill that mission. It also calls us for deeper introspection and a willingness to slow down and allow those answers to be revealed in time rather than rushing to define purpose or chase an outcome. Yeah, sometimes I think that we're in such a rush to have these labels or be a part of these groups that we don't take the time to just go slowly and let life kind of be revealed to us. We're kind of rushing to things because we think that the world is rushing us. And in some ways, the people outside of us are with their expectations, but God isn't rushing you to do anything. He wants you to do things right, and He wants you to discover things the right way that will fulfill you overall in your life. So Matthew Kelly goes on to talk about how all talents come from God. Our talents can be immense and powerful, but that's exactly why we often forget the first voice of needs. Talents can be so alluring that we start to believe they are self-generated. Talents can be used to further either the light or the darkness of the world, and we often feel tempted to use them for selfish ends or to seek validation, recognition, or control. I really liked the part where he says that everything that you're given is a tool to either further the light or the darkness in the world. And that's a really just a deep thought are the things that I'm choosing to do and the things that I'm choosing to develop, really creating light in this world. Or am I just using it for selfish gains? And so we see how individuals with extraordinary talent sometimes experience deep struggles with their mental health. This is a part of the price of free will, the very grace that makes love possible. What Matthew Kelly is saying here is that every gift that you've been given is to be used to be a gift to the world in a positive way. And we often get really in our egos, and you kind of see that in like celebrity culture. He goes on to say that because our talents come from God, creativity is the door to our talents. We are made in the image of God, and as such, the creativity of God lives within each of us. It yearns for expression. So I do believe that we are all truly creative. I learned that a couple years ago that God is creative. He is a creative source. And so because we are made in the image of Him, we are also creative. Those God-given talents are accompanied by God's own capacity for goodness, love, kindness, and generosity. Your talents are clues, just like your needs are clues. Clues about how to live your life to the fullest, how to be happy, and how to live an abundant life. These clues will lead you to your mission. So yeah, I think that, before I went on my healing journey and I was filled with a lot of traumas and insecurities, I didn't think that I was creative at all. As I released a lot of that baggage that I had within me, and as I asked God for more guidance and I asked God for more help in my life, I feel like that's when all of my creative things started to flourish. Matthew Kelly goes on to describe how everybody is a genius. Albert Einstein once wrote, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live his whole life believing that it is stupid." The question to ask is what is your genius? I really found this chapter to be very personally healing when I first read it because I think that I've had a lot of insecurities about not feeling smart. Because we are in this world that shapes us to all be the same. When you don't fit into those boxes, you start to become really hard on yourself that success and things and talents are only reserved for a select few. But it's only because people haven't taken the time to find what is your genius, or you haven't taken the time to find what is your genius. Matthew Kelly believes that there is something you are better at than anyone else in the world. The question is, what is your one thing? You might think to yourself that you don't have a genius or that only extraordinary people possess it. But who are the extraordinary people anyway? It can't only be the ones who achieve public success. If we only count them as geniuses, then what becomes of the rest of us? I actually really struggled in school. College was like really hard for me. I had always kind of struggled in school. And even though I got into a really good high school, I mean, it was like pulling teeth for me to get good grades, and I never understood why. But I was overall like a pretty quiet kid. I never really had like a hyperactive kind of personality. So I don't think anybody was ever really concerned about my learning abilities. My freshman year, I basically kind of almost failed out of college. And to get back into school, we had to write an appeal letter. And thankfully, I had been babysitting for this family for the last few years since high school. And the day that I got my letter that I wasn't going to be able to come back to school, the lady that I babysat for is a lawyer. And she was saw me all sad and she was like, "What's wrong?" And, "Oh, I've gotten kicked out of school. Like, I can't go back to college." And she goes, "Why?" And I was like, "Because like I'm not good at school. I failed all of my classes and I am just, not going to go back." And this isn't a story that I've shared with a lot of people because, I mean, yeah. But I think that it kind of relates to everything that we're talking about. But anyways, she was like, "Let me look at the letter that they sent you." And she points out that they are asking for an appeal letter and for as a way to be reconsidered to go back to school. And she goes, "You're going to go home and you're going to write a letter and you're going to tell them why you failed and all of these things." I go back home and I write, a one-page paper on why I should go get back to school, and I give it to the lady who I'm working for. And she goes, "Blanca, I'm going to need you to give me a little more. I want you to go back home. I want you to look at all the resources at the school and be completely honest as to why you ended up doing really badly your freshman year." I told them my whole life story and I gave them resources as to how I was going to do better if I was allowed to go back to school the following year. And Janelle, shout out to Janelle, I'm still really close friends with her, looks at my 8-page paper and she edits it. This is before ChatGPT. And she proofreads my paper, 8 pages, and I send it off to my school. And I kind of have given up on the idea that I'm going to go back to school. I'm at this point praying really hard to God to give me a sign, or because I feel like a complete failure. Mind you, I'm the first one in my family to go to school. So it just felt like the worst thing that could have possibly happened to me at that point in my life. A month later, it's like the middle of summer. I've already registered for classes at the community college, have lost hope that I'm going to be able to go back to Ohio that fall. I get a letter from my school, from the dean of the business school. "Blanca, we read your 8-page paper and we would love for you to come to Ohio and talk to the business dean and discuss the letter that you wrote." And miraculously, the dean ended up feeling mercy for me. And I guess they loved the letter. They ended up saying that I was one of 2 people out of all the kids that they had deferred that summer to be even considered to go back to school. And it was only because of what a well-written paper I'd written. Now looking back, I feel like that should have been a sign to me and all of like the miracles that God was doing for me, and I wasn't aware enough yet to be really grateful to him that that was a gift from him to be able to go back to school that year. I ended up going back to school that fall. I ended up meeting my long-term boyfriend, which I wouldn't have met if I wouldn't have been allowed to go back. And throughout that semester, I was doing everything that I explained to them that I was going to do, but I still was not passing my math classes. And so, I have like this deep low self-esteem because I feel like I'm a dummy. And the whole time, I didn't realize that I had this talent of being a good communicator. And my counselor and she ended up being my counselor for all 5 years of my time at school. She was monitoring all of my classes and all of my tests and all of my exams, and she goes, Blanca, I actually think that you might have a learning disability. And she was like, have you heard of ADHD? It wasn't something that was discussed or even brought up in my life. I don't think I even knew anybody with ADHD. I knew kids who had learning disabilities, but never the specific word ADHD because of just how difficult it was for me to get through some of my classes and the anxieties that I felt. I ended up getting tested for ADHD. It was like this whole month-long process. And in my examinations for if I had ADHD, which I ended up being diagnosed, I also got diagnosed with dyscalculia, which I had never heard of that word in my entire life before that diagnosis. And my psychiatrist at the time who was doing my testing was like, have you heard of dyscalculia? It's dyslexia, but with numbers. It had felt like this whole relief had been lifted off of my shoulders because this entire time, my whole life, I had thought that I was dumb. And it turns out that I actually had dyscalculia. It doesn't happen like with immediate numbers, like if I'm just looking at a calculator, but if I'm looking at arithmetic or really complicated math orders, I switch the numbers. And so my psychiatrist at the time, when you're doing a full evaluation for ADHD, you have a math exam and you have a comprehension exam. And they're looking at your math, the way that you are going about it. And she goes, I just in your math exam, I noticed that you continuously switch numbers and that's why you always get the wrong answers at the end. Finally, somebody had cared about me enough to notice that there were issues that I was having that I was trying really hard to move through, but I wasn't able to on my own. My counselor noticing that I was good at communications, and slowly God started to reveal to me that I wasn't dumb, that I had some things that made things a little bit more complicated for me. And my communications class didn't have many math classes. It only had the core classes. And then thankfully I had a smart boyfriend, so he kind of would take my math classes for me because my math classes were online at that point. But this whole time I never was a dummy, which is what I'm trying to say. And maybe there's somebody out there who might think that they're dumb, that they don't have the capacity to do something, but it's only because nobody has taken the time to help them, to see little glimmers of light in them and really help them develop that. And they continuously put them in a box that everybody else is walking. And so they live their life thinking that they don't have their own genius. Now, one of my favorite pastimes and one of my favorite hobbies is to get creative through my writing and through these videos where I'm communicating all of the things that I at one point didn't think that I was good at. So yeah, that story, I share it because I think it creates context on the feeling of you not having your own genius. Matthew Kelly goes on to give the example of his mother. Why is she a genius? Because she knows who she is and why she is here. She has no illusions about being someone she is not. She has discovered her genius, pursued it, exercised it, and celebrated it. Matthew Kelly ends up describing his mom as this woman from Australia who, if you see her, you might not think that she has a genius because she's just a woman that has raised 8 children. She goes to her job, but she has found a way to find the light in each one of her kids and been able to encourage something within them. I think that a lot of us, especially right now in social media, it is so hard not to get lost in illusions. And everybody wants to be a social media influencer. Everybody wants these massive amounts of recognition and popularity. And so when we don't reach those things and we don't have thousands of followers, maybe you only have 500 or 1,000 or 50 or whatever, you think, well, I'm not good at anything because nobody is recognizing it. But maybe that's not what you're meant here for. And so we compare our lives to all these other people and think that because it's not in this way, that we can't have something that we're naturally really good at. So any of us can experience even the smallest taste of the peace that comes from knowing who we are and where we are and why we are here, regardless of the outcomes or others' opinions, then we too will have discovered our genius. This also reminds me of my mom as well. My mom comes from this really poor village in El Salvador where, her whole life, they probably didn't expect anything for her life. My mom's been able to come to the United States and really change the course of the direction for all of our family's life. We would all be in El Salvador living a very different life if it wasn't for her genius, which is her bravery, which is her ability to spontaneously go for what she knows she's capable of doing, coming to the United States on her own and working really hard and eventually discovering her love for cosmetology. My mom's a hairstylist and she owns a salon here in DC, and she loves it, and you can tell that she finds so much passion in it. Even now in her retirement, people still come to get a haircut from my mom. You can tell that her life's purpose was to be a trailblazer for our family. You might look at my mom's life and you might think she hasn't accomplished anything. She doesn't have degrees. She doesn't have all of these things, and she doesn't live in this way. You might think she's not extraordinary, but she is extraordinary because from what we come from, to be where we are is extraordinary. I wanted to just dive a little deeper into what makes someone a genius, knowing who you are and why you are here, and having no illusions about being someone you are not. I think that sometimes we live in a time where everybody is really pretending to be someone that they're not. And it happens so subtly because we all want to be a part of the crowd, and there's a bit of shame of who we are, who we've been, maybe the families that we've come from. I know that I have felt shame maybe in the past of my own upbringing or how my parents live, and coming from a third world country, I definitely have had to move through that shame and grow up and be proud of who I am. My mom the other day recently innocently made me laugh. I said something like, you're not supposed to do that. And she answered, oh, honey, I'm a woman with no education. Let me be. I reflected on that moment and realized that in her humility, my mom knows exactly who she is, with no shame. She confidently walks her path with no pretense of being more than the woman God has called her to be. But she has always acted in the moments when God has invited her to step up and be more than she's been. It made me think about my own life. A few years ago, I don't know how I ended up in some of the crowds I've been in or have had some of the experiences that I've had. But overall, I never truly felt happy. Coming from humble beginnings myself, I always felt like I had to pretend or work to be like my friends, who all seemed so affluent and status-driven. I realized I had nothing in common with them, even though I had chemistry with them, even though I got along with them. My life has required me to work for every step to push my own cart forward. Recently, I stopped hanging with the same crowds of status, fun, and image-driven people. I'm realizing that I come from humble beginnings and I need to be proud of who I am instead of pretending to be someone I'm not. Just like how God opened doors for me in school and in opportunities, like when He helped me get into good high schools or get into college. Those were things that I never even saw for myself, but God opened the door for me. Not because I was trying to be grand, but because of the humility of not desiring more than what was meant for me. That is who I am called to be. Instead of thinking grandiose thoughts, I'm choosing to align myself now with people who share similar values, who work hard, and who understand true humility. That is how I'll find my flow again. I've realized that I've been lost for a long time because I was chasing the fast lane of fun. So anyway, I think This list of what makes someone a genius is really about realizing how much time we spend pretending to be people we are not, just so others might validate us or accept us in their groups. Our genius lies in simply being who we are, having the humility to let God reveal the gifts and talents He has for us one step at a time, and being grateful for the life we have, even if it's simple. I think that overall this episode of Talents has been very healing for me. I think sometimes when you're in the world and you see how people live and they're having fun in their superficiality, you think, I should go in that direction, and you want to be in that direction because it feels fun for a while. But then I think that if you're truly living a spiritual path, you're going to keep hitting roadblocks because God wants you to continue in the path of humility that you began in. I hope that this ties into the episode, but look at the people with the millions of followers and the people who have all of these things, compare it that you're not extraordinary too. It's really about rethinking how we measure our genius. Have we simply been judging ourselves by all the wrong criteria? But it's the thing that reflects the core of who you are. Your genius might change the course of history, or it might be expressed quietly, like being the best teacher or mentor or parent you can be. What matters isn't the form your genius takes, but that you embrace and celebrate it.